On the highways of Tennessee, there are stories that drivers whisper but never want to admit as truth. They talk about the great Smoky Mountains, about the way fog rolls down the ridges at night, thick as concrete, hiding more than the road ahead. Some truckers say they've seen headlights vanish. Others claim to have picked up hitchhikers who were never really there. This is one of those stories, a confession from a man who swore he would never tell it aloud, until the memory of that night nearly drove him mad. What happened to him wasn't just weather, and it wasn't just nerves. It was the Smokies, alive, breathing, holding something inside their ridges that no driver should ever face. Stay until the end, because what he saw at dawn will make you rethink every lonely mile you've ever driven.
Chapter 1. The Long Haul into Maine. The night started, like so many others, rolling out of Boston with a full trailer and a deadline that left no room for dawdling. The load was bound for a paper mill deep in the heart of Maine, past the little border towns most people have never heard of. Route 201. Truckers call it the Old Canada Road. It winds through black pine forests, hugging the Kennebec River like a serpent. And by the time you cross into Maine, the silence settles on your shoulders like a weight. The highway north of Augusta felt endless, the kind of stretch where headlights seemed swallowed whole, leaving the pavement looking like a ribbon vanishing into the dark. Maine in the fall was a different kind of cold, damp, biting, the kind that crawled under your jacket no matter how high you pulled the zipper. A light mist rolled in off the river, carrying the smell of wet pine and the faint metallic tang of old logging machinery rusting out in the woods. The CB radio was alive that night, not with conversation, but with half static, half chatter, truckers swapping weather updates, a little banter, the kind of lonely company that made a cab feel less like a coffin on wheels. But mixed in with it, every so often, came a sound I couldn't pin down. Not words, exactly. More like a burst of signal scrambled into tones. One moment, clear voices talking about frost on the road near Skowhegan. The next, something that didn't belong. A distortion, sharp enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. The logbook showed hours left to burn, no choice but to press on. Fuel was topped off back in Augusta. The thermos was hot with bitter coffee, and the road ahead was mine. But mile by mile, the traffic thinned until I felt like the only set of headlights left alive in the entire state. No taillights, no oncoming rigs, not even a stray car. Just me. The Kennebec River glinting pale beside me, and trees crowding so close to the shoulder that they leaned into the lane like spectators. That's when I caught the first glimpse of movement. At first, I chalked it up to the usual night tricks. The way a tree stump could look like a man, or how fog swirled into shapes that dissolved the moment you blinked. But this was different. The headlights caught something darting between the pines, too fast for deer, too solid for smoke. Just long enough to make me sit forward, gripping the wheel tighter, heart climbing a notch. I reached for the CB mic, thumb brushing the button. Breaker 19. Anyone northbound on the 201 tonight? My voice cracked with a little too much edge. Silence. Static hissed back at me. Then, a click. Just one. No words, no laugh, no voice. Just a click, like someone acknowledging but choosing not to speak. The road climbed toward Bingham, the grade pulling at the engine. Trees thickened, and the fog grew denser, weaving between the trunks like it had a mind of its own. My eyes flicked from the road to the mirrors. Nothing behind me, nothing ahead, just the endless black tunnel of Route 201. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. And Maine has a way of reminding truckers that out here, you never really are. Chapter 2. The Jackman stopped. By the time the lights of Jackman appeared, my body ached from the wheel. Jackman isn't much on the map. Just a scatter of buildings near the Canadian border where truckers stop to rest, fuel, or grab a hot meal before pushing on toward Moosehead Lake or the remote logging roads. Out here, civilization doesn't sprawl, it clings. One diner, one truck stop, a couple of motels with peeling paint and signs that buzzed like angry hornets when the neon flickered in the cold. I eased my rig off Route 201 and into the lot of a weathered truck stop that had clearly seen better days. The gravel crunched under my tires, headlights sweeping across a row of parked semis. Most of them were dark, drivers already asleep in their bunks. Diesel fumes hung low, mixing with the scent of fried food wafting from inside the building. As I cut the engine, the quiet pressed in. There's a particular kind of silence in Maine at night, the kind that feels alive. Not empty, but watchful. Even with the hiss of air brakes and the hum of the refrigeration units, I could feel the woods pressing closer, thick pine shadows crowding against the edge of the floodlights. Inside, the diner was warm, but dim, its windows fogged from the heat of the kitchen. A jukebox in the corner cycled quietly through old country tunes, though nobody seemed to be listening. A few truckers hunched in booths, nursing mugs of coffee that looked like they'd been sitting for hours. Nobody laughed, nobody joked. I slid into a booth near the window, ordered black coffee, and pulled out my logbook. That's when I noticed how the locals, guys in plaid jackets, a pair of hunters at the counter, kept glancing toward the window like they expected something to be staring back. One old-timer with a gray beard caught my eye. His face was lined like a map of every mile he'd ever driven, eyes sharp despite his age. He leaned across his plate of half-eaten eggs and muttered in my direction, voice gravelly. "Don't keep north on the 201 after midnight. Not tonight." I frowned. "Why's that?" He didn't answer right away, just tapped the edge of his mug, staring down at the dark liquid. Then he said, "Lights. Out past Moose River. Ain't no headlights. Ain't no planes. Been around longer than any of us. Folks that follow 'em don't come back." The waitress set my coffee down and gave him a hard look. "Leave the man alone, Charlie," she said. "He don't need stories." But even as she spoke, her hands shook just enough to rattle the spoon against the saucer. Charlie smirked, but it wasn't the kind of smile that carried humor. It was the kind that came from knowing something and hating that you knew it. "You think I'm telling tales," he said, his voice rising a notch. "Ask about the driver from last month. Parked just past Jackman, waiting out a storm. Never checked in at the mill. They found his rig 2 weeks later, engine still running, door wide open. No driver." The waitress clattered the coffee pot down harder than she meant to, then quickly walked off toward the counter. The hunters stopped whispering and pretended to focus on their food. The whole place tightened, like everyone had decided at once that silence was safer. I sipped my coffee, bitter and hot, and tried to shake it off. Truckers trade ghost stories everywhere. From Arizona desert haunts to lonely Montana passes, it's part of the culture. But the way they avoided my eyes, the way the waitress wouldn't come back to my booth, the way Charlie leaned closer and whispered, "Keep your wheels turning, Tuna. Son, don't stop for the lights." That made it different. Outside, the night air bit into my lungs as I walked back to the rig. Frost had already started to form on the edges of the windshield, glittering under the truck stop lights. For a second, I thought I saw something glowing in the tree line beyond the lot. Not headlights, not a reflection, just a bluish shimmer that disappeared when I blinked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and felt the rumble steady my nerves. The diner lights glowed warm in the mirror as I pulled onto the blacktop again, leaving Jackman behind. The clock on the dash ticked past midnight, and the woods ahead felt hungrier than ever. Chapter 3. The Silent Woods. The road out of Jackman tightened, curling north into darker country. Once you leave that little cluster of light behind, it's like driving into another world. The pines crowd closer, heavy branches bowing low as if they're leaning in to listen. Fog drifts across the asphalt in thick, rolling sheets, breaking apart under the beam of my headlights only to gather again in the mirrors. By now, I'd normally be talking on the CB. Most nights, there's chatter to keep a driver awake. Weather warnings, jokes, even some music bleeding through from someone's cab. But that night, the CB was dead. No voices, no static, just silence. The kind of silence that feels staged, like something had reached out and turned the world's volume knob all the way down. My truck's engine hummed steady, but even that sound seemed muffled, like the woods were swallowing it whole. Every crunch of gravel under the tires, every hiss of air brakes on the downhill stretches echoed too sharp against the quiet. The further I drove, the heavier that silence grew until it pressed against the cab glass like a weight. The Kennebec River snaked along the roadside, its black surface reflecting only the faintest smear of moonlight. Normally, a driver would catch glimpses of deer or the flash of a raccoon's eyes, but the woods were empty. Not a single sign of life. No animals, no birds, no movement. Just the thick, looming pines and the ribbon of road unraveling into nowhere. That's when I saw it again. Movement. Quick, deliberate. Slipping between the trees on the left side of the road, my lights caught the shape for just a second. Tall, too tall to be a deer, with limbs too long for a man. The figure froze just outside the tree line. Then it was gone, swallowed by the dark. I gripped the wheel tighter. My pulse climbed. The CB crackled once, sharp enough to make me jump. I snatched the mic, thumbed the switch. Breaker 19, anyone running north on the 201 tonight. You catching this weather? Only static, but buried in that static. Just for a breath of a second, I swore I heard something else. Not words, not human. A sound that carried rhythm, like syllables wrapped in distortion. My mind clawed for meaning, but found nothing. Then the static died, leaving me with the hollow silence again. The fog thickened. Visibility dropped until the world was nothing but the short reach of my headlights. Shadows shifted in the mist, bending into forms that seemed too solid to be tricks. Shapes that lingered a heartbeat too long before dissolving. My chest tightened as I realized, out here, with this silence pressing in, there was no way to tell what was real and what wasn't. I slowed the rig, eyes scanning the shoulders, the ditches, the tree line. The clock on the dash ticked closer to 1 a.m. I was deep into country where fuel stops vanished, where cell signals didn't bother reaching. Just me, the road, and whatever was watching from the trees. And I knew something was watching, because every time I exhaled, it felt like the woods exhaled back. I pressed harder on the accelerator, the rig straining as I pulled north. Somewhere up ahead lay Moose River, the stretch where Charlie and Jackman had warned me not to stop. But mile by mile, I could feel the warning taking root, burrowing deeper until every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Still, the road pulled me forward. And behind the silence, I thought I heard the faintest echo, footsteps matching the rhythm of my wheels running just out of sight in the woods. Chapter 4. The lights appear. Moose River came slow, a curve of blacktop where the pines thinned just enough to let the fog spread like smoke across the ground. The dashboard clock crept past 1:30 in the morning. My eyes burned from the strain, my jaw tight from clenching down on every mile. The silence hadn't lifted. If anything, it had deepened, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then it happened. At first, I thought it was another rig coming southbound, a set of headlights appearing faint in the fog. But as I squinted into the dark, the beams didn't line up. They weren't coming from the road. They hovered just above the ditch line, two bluish-white orbs drifting across the shoulder as smooth as water. I eased off the accelerator, heart hammering, breath stuck halfway between inhale and exhale. The lights moved slow, deliberate, almost curious. They weren't beams. There was no flare, no cone stretching out like a headlight's throw. They were spheres, glowing from within, pulsing faintly as if they had a heartbeat. One drifted out onto the asphalt. My rig's headlights washed over it. But the light didn't change. It stayed solid, a glowing sphere about the size of a basketball floating a few feet off the ground. The other hovered near the tree line, weaving between the fog curls like it was testing me. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, but my foot froze over the pedal. For a moment, the highway felt less like a road and more like a stage, and I was the only actor under a spotlight. The CB snapped alive, loud enough to make me jolt. Static roared, then cleared into a single voice. A man, ragged, panicked. "Don't stop! Don't you stop!" Then nothing, just dead air. The lights pulsed brighter, as if answering the transmission. I forced my foot down. The rig lurched forward, tires spitting gravel from the shoulder as I pulled back onto the center line. The lights didn't scatter. They followed. One slipped alongside the trailer, gliding with impossible smoothness, while the other hovered in front of me like it was leading the way. I gripped the wheel, sweat slicking my palms. The fog thickened into walls, and the world shrank to those lights and the ribbon of road barely visible between them. Every hair on my arms rose. This wasn't mechanical. It wasn't natural. And then I saw the proof. The orb ahead dipped low, brushing the asphalt. For an instant, its glow left a mark. When my headlights reached the spot, I saw tire tracks burned into the pavement, black, fresh, impossibly twisted, as though some heavy rig had swerved across both lanes and then vanished into thin air. No skid, no trail, just two lines gouged into the road that ended abruptly at the shoulder. I leaned forward, straining to see beyond. Nothing waited there. No wreck, no headlights, no taillights. Just empty ditch and trees standing silent, their trunks fading into the fog. The lights pulsed again. The CB crackled, spitting out fragments, overlapping voices, hundreds of them, whispering too fast, too layered to understand. Men, women, some crying, some calling names. For a moment, I thought I heard my own name in the mix. Then it all cut off in a snap, leaving only the hum of the tires on the blacktop. I wanted to stop. I wanted to throw open the cab door, step down onto the asphalt, and just look at them. The pull was that strong, like gravity, like something in my chest was tethered to those lights. My hands even twitched toward the brakes. But then I remembered the old man in Jackman. "Keep your wheels turning, son. Don't stop for the lights." I pressed the accelerator harder, forcing the rig's engine to climb. The roar filled the cab, and for the first time that night, it drowned out the silence. The orb in front of me lifted, rising higher, then slid off into the tree line. The one beside the trailer flickered like a dying bulb and then vanished. The fog began to thin. The road opened slightly. My mirrors showed nothing but blackness stretching behind. For the next few miles, I drove with white knuckles, my eyes wide, every nerve screaming. The highway felt empty again, but not in the way it had before. Now it felt like something was pacing me, just out of sight, waiting. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning, because the lights weren't headlights, they weren't reflections, they were hunting. Chapter 5. The broken down rig. The fog lingered, clinging low across the road as I pushed north, each mile marker sliding past like a clock counting down. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel too tight, my eyes raw from refusing to blink too long. I told myself I'd seen tricks before, mirages in the desert, swamp lights in the south, even phantom headlights out in the Dakotas. But nothing I'd ever witnessed matched the weight of those orbs, or the way the silence of Route 201 wrapped around them like a shroud. By the time I crossed a bend near the edge of Moose River, I noticed it. Tail lights up ahead. Relief washed through me, sharp as a shot of whiskey. Another rig, idling at the shoulder, hazard lights flashing a dull amber rhythm through the fog. The sight of another trucker meant company, meant safety, meant I wasn't alone out here with the woods and the silence. I slowed, easing onto the shoulder behind the rig. My beams cut across its trailer, a standard dry van, faded white with streaks of grime. The tractor still rumbled, engine running low and steady. Steam puffed faint from its stacks in the cold, but the driver's door hung wide open, swaying in the damp breeze. Something about that image froze me, the door yawning like a mouth left open mid-sentence, the cab light glowing weak against the dark, but no figure inside. I flicked my CB. Breaker 19, driver in the northbound rig pulled off near Moose River, copy. Static. I thumbed it again. You got trouble. Driver, you need a hand. Nothing. Just the hiss of dead air. I climbed down from my cab, boots crunching gravel, breath steaming in the cold. The air was heavier here, thick with the resin scent of pine and the faint iron tang of something else. Metal, sharp, and bitter, like blood on the air. The fog hung tighter, muting sound, turning each footstep into something swallowed whole by the night. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The cab was empty, papers scattered on the seat, a half-empty thermos rolling in the cup holder, engine idling steady, like its owner had just stepped out for a moment, but the driver was gone. I lowered my gaze. That's when I saw them. Boot prints, fresh, pressed deep into the damp shoulder mud. They trailed away from the truck, cutting a straight line toward the tree line. No stagger, no hesitation, just a purposeful march directly into the woods. And they didn't come back. The hair on my arms stood on end. Every instinct screamed that I shouldn't follow, but my eyes traced those prints until they vanished into the black curtain of pines. The fog swirled thick at their base, glowing faintly as though it had caught some hidden light. Behind me, my rig idled with a steady hum, its lights casting long shadows across the abandoned truck. For a moment, I was caught between choices: step into those woods or climb back into my cab and pretend I'd never seen any of it. That's when the CB inside the empty rig squawked, loud, sudden. I spun toward it. From the open cab door came a burst of static, then a voice, strained, hoarse, desperate. They're here. The words crackled, then dissolved into static again. I backed up slow, heart hammering against my ribs, eyes locked on that open cab door. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. Just the drone of the idling engine and the fog seeping deeper around us. I stumbled back to my own truck, climbed in, slammed the door. My hands shook as I jammed the shifter into gear, pulling back onto the road. In my mirrors, the other rig sat lonely, hazards blinking like a heartbeat in the mist. The open door still gaped wide. The boot print still led into the trees, and as I accelerated, I swore I saw something at the tree line. A glow, pale, pulsing, watching me go. For the next 20 miles, I didn't touch the CB. I didn't glance at the mirrors. I kept my eyes pinned to the road and the white line ahead, whispering under my breath the words Charlie had told me back in Jackman. Keep your wheels turning. Don't stop for the lights. But the question ate at me with every mile. What happens when they make you stop? Chapter 6. The Pursuit. The road out of Moose River narrowed, bending and twisting through walls of pine so tall they shut out the stars. I'd been on lonely stretches before, but never like this. The silence wasn't just absence. It was presence. It felt like the woods themselves were waiting, watching. The glow of the abandoned rig still burned in my mirrors, hazards pulsing like a heartbeat until the fog swallowed it whole. I pressed harder on the throttle, urging the engine to climb, telling myself distance would keep me safe. But the feeling in my gut said different. A shiver rolled down my spine as the dashboard lit up, first one warning, then another. Oil pressure flickered. Battery light flared. Then the check engine warning blazed red across the console. My rig had just been serviced outside Boston. Nothing should have been wrong. But suddenly the gauges spun like a roulette wheel, needles twitching madly before freezing dead. Not now, I muttered, slamming my palm against the dash. The headlights flickered, then steadied, then dimmed again, casting the asphalt in weak, sputtering beams. And that's when they came back. The orbs! They slid out of the tree line as if pulled by invisible strings. 2, then 3, then more. Glowing spheres of bluish-white light weaving silently across the blacktop. My cab filled with that cold glow, bleeding through the windshield as if the glass wasn't even there. One hovered just above the hood. Another drifted alongside the driver's window, close enough that I could almost reach out and touch it. The engine coughed. The rig shuddered. Warning buzzers screeched as if every system was failing at once. I mashed the accelerator. RPM screamed, tires howled, but the truck barely climbed past 40. It was like something heavy clamped down on the trailer, dragging me back. The CB snapped alive again, spitting static that crawled over my skin. Then came voices, layered, overlapping, whispering, pleading. A woman's voice begged for help. A man cried out in pain. Then, clear as glass, a voice spoke my name. Not my handle, not driver, my real name. I froze. Breath caught sharp. Only one person alive should know that name out here. Yet the voice came again, soft, coaxing, almost tender. Pull over. The lights pulsed brighter. My mirrors filled with them, half a dozen now, circling like predators, hemming me in. They didn't flash like headlights or sway like lanterns. They moved with intent, with rhythm, like they were working together, herding me off the road. The logging road appeared on the right, barely more than a dirt cut swallowed in fog. The orb ahead dipped low, hovering over the turn like it was marking the way. The wheel fought me, pulling right, steering itself toward that road. I gritted my teeth, fought back with both hands. The cab filled with whispers, too many voices to count, all of them rising into a frantic chorus. The lights surged, swirling around the truck until the cab glowed like an aquarium. My reflection stared back from the windshield, pale, sweat-soaked, eyes wide. I slammed my fist against the dash. No, not tonight. The rig bucked like a live animal, tires squealing as I forced it back onto the center line. The orb at the hood flickered, then shot upward, streaking into the treetops before vanishing. The others wavered, flickered, dimmed, then regrouped, falling back behind me, hovering in my mirrors like hunters biding their time. The engine roared again, as if whatever weight had been holding me eased for just a breath. The gauges leveled, headlights steadied, but the dread didn't leave. I knew this wasn't over. Up ahead, the fog thickened again, swallowing the road. The lights didn't retreat. They followed, patient, silent, waiting for me to falter, to slow, to stop. And I knew with a certainty that shook me. I couldn't run from them forever. At some point, the road would end. And when it did, the lights would be waiting. Chapter 7. The Stranger. In the diner. Dawn in Maine doesn't break. It creeps. The black sky lightens to a bruised gray. Fog still clutching the ground like it doesn't want to let go. By the time I rolled into the Forks, my nerves were shredded raw. Every bump in the road felt like a jolt. Every shadow in the mirrors made my chest seize. The Forks is barely more than a crossroads where rafters gather in the summer to take on the Kennebec River. In the off-season, it's quiet, too quiet. A single gas station, a bait and tackle shop with boarded windows, and a squat diner with a flickering neon sign that spelled out Mabel's, though the M was burned out. I pulled into the gravel lot, engine hissing, brakes sighing with relief. The place looked alive. 3 pickup trucks parked out front, a couple of muddy ATVs on trailers. I sat for a long moment in the cab, staring at the diner's windows fogged from warmth inside. My hands trembled on the wheel. I hadn't realized just how badly until I tried to kill the engine and missed the key slot twice. Inside, the diner smelled of bacon grease, black coffee, and old pine cleaner. A bell above the door gave a tired jingle as I stepped in. Booths lined the windows. A counter stretched the length of the room, and behind it a waitress in her 50s moved with the sharpness of someone who'd been up since 4. The chatter was hushed. 3 locals in flannel sat at one booth, talking low. A man in a Carhartt jacket sipped coffee at the counter, eyes on the steam rising from his mug. Nobody laughed. Nobody lifted their gaze. I slid into a booth by the far wall. The vinyl squeaked under my weight, cold from the night air still clinging to my clothes. The waitress came over, pad in hand. "Coffee?" she asked. I nodded. "Strong." She poured from a pot, the smell hitting me like medicine. I drank half the mug before she even walked away. The warmth spread through me, but it didn't ease the unease gnawing my gut. That's when he spoke. The man at the counter. Gray hair slicked back, face like old leather, the kind of man who'd spent decades outdoors. He swiveled on his stool and fixed me with pale blue eyes that didn't blink enough. "You saw them, didn't you?" My throat tightened. "Saw what?" His lips tugged into a humorless smile. "The lights. Nobody comes through Jackman past midnight without seeing something. Not unless they're blessed or cursed. And from the look on you, I'd say it ain't the first one." The chatter in the booth behind me went silent. The waitress paused mid-step, eyes flicking toward the old man like she wanted to shut him up but didn't dare. He slid off the stool, mug in hand, and walked over to my booth, sat down across from me without asking. His presence filled the space like smoke. "Folks call me Harlan," he said. "Been running these roads longer than you've been alive. I've seen the lights more times than I care to count. Lost men to 'em, too. Good men." I didn't answer, just waited. He leaned in, voice low. "They ain't new. Been here since before the paper mills, before the loggers. The Abenaki people told of spirits in the woods, watchers who led men astray. Said they were drawn to those who traveled alone. Said the lights fed on the loss." The waitress slammed plates down 2 booths over, loud enough to rattle. "Don't fill his head with your stories, Harlan." But her voice trembled. She didn't look our way. Harlan's gaze never left mine. "Last year, a driver pulled off by Moose River, same stretch you just came through. They found his rig 2 weeks later, still idling, just like the one you passed last night." My stomach dropped. "Boot prints?" I asked before I realized I'd spoken. He nodded, slow, straight into the trees. "Never came back out." The diner seemed to shrink around me. The low murmur of voices blurred, the clatter of dishes dimmed. It was just me and Harlan, his eyes drilling through me like he already knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. "You can outrun them for a night," he said, "but once they've marked you, they'll follow. Doesn't matter where you go. South, west, doesn't matter. They'll wait. They'll find you." I forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "So what? These lights, they're ghosts, aliens." He shook his head. "Worse, they're hunters, and you're already in their sights." The words sat heavy between us, like iron. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this was just exhaustion, just tricks of fog and fear. But deep down, I knew he wasn't lying. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I stared out the window, into the pale dawn fog rising off the Kennebec. For a moment, I thought I saw it again. A faint glow between the trees, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Harlan slid out of the booth and walked back to the counter. The locals resumed their quiet chatter. The waitress banged plates around harder than she needed to, but the truth had already settled in my chest. This wasn't over. The lights weren't finished with me. Chapter 8. The Return to the Woods. Finale. The fork should have been the end of the road. I could have turned south, pushed for the coast, and left Route 201 behind forever. Any sane driver would have. But sanity didn't matter anymore. The lights weren't done with me. And deep down, I knew I wasn't done with them either. I spent the day in the diner booth, coffee growing cold, notebook open, scribbling thoughts I couldn't make sense of. The waitress kept her distance. Harlan never looked my way again, as if saying the words out loud had drained something from him. But their silence spoke louder than anything. They knew. They'd always known. By sundown, I had made up my mind. If I kept running, the lights would follow. If I kept driving south, they'd find me on I-95, on the Mass Pike, even parked in my own driveway. The only chance was to face them head on. I bought fresh batteries from the gas station, pulled a handheld recorder from my duffel, old habit from years on the road, recording notes, thoughts, sometimes just the rhythm of the wheels to stay awake. That night, it would serve another purpose. Proof. If I didn't make it back, at least the tape would tell the story. I rolled out after midnight, trailer light, fuel topped off, nerves wired. The cab smelled of diesel, sweat, and stale coffee. The recorder clicked on, red light glowing faint in the dash. My own voice sounded strange in the cab's stillness. Northbound, 201, 1 a.m. If anyone finds this, I'm going back. The road swallowed me fast. The fog was heavier than the night before, thick as wool, twisting around the beams of my headlights until the world shrank to 30 feet of gray tunnel. The trees leaned closer, their black trunks disappearing into the mist. The Kennebec River ran dark beside me, surfeit like glass. For 20 miles, nothing happened. Just the hum of tires, the groan of gears, my heartbeat pounding too loud in my ears. I almost convinced myself it had been a dream. Sleep deprivation, nerves, imagination gone wild. Then the CB crackled. Soft at first, like fingers brushing sandpaper. Then the whispers began, layered, overlapping, dozens of voices speaking at once. My name again, clear this time, repeated in male and female voices, rising and falling in a chant that made the glass vibrate. The fog ahead split, and the lights appeared. Not 2, not 3, a dozen, maybe more. They poured out of the tree line, glowing spheres hovering above the asphalt, weaving together into patterns that made my head spin. They pulsed in unison, like a heartbeat too big for the earth. I slowed, couldn't help it. The pull was stronger this time, dragging at the wheel, tugging at my chest, whispering into my bones. My recorder hissed and popped, then filled with the sound of voices pleading, crying, screaming. Some sounded like truckers I'd known. Some sounded like family long gone. The lights surrounded me, closing in tight until my cab glowed cold, shadows stretching impossibly long across the dash. I pressed the accelerator, but the truck groaned like it was chained in place. The headlights flickered, gauges spun wild, the engine coughed, then darkness. The rig died mid-stride, total silence. Headlights off, engine dead. Even the CB fell mute. The only light came from them, dozens of orbs circling, pulsing, closing in. My breath fogged the glass. My hands shook as I fumbled with the recorder. They're here. They've shut everything down. My voice cracked. If anyone finds this, the driver's side window filled with glow. I turned and froze. For the first time, I saw inside one of them. It wasn't just light. It was an eye, vast, lidless, glowing with pale fire. The kind of eye that had watched men before there were roads, before there were trucks, before there was even a name for Maine. The whispering voices rose to a scream. The lights surged forward. Glass rattled, metal bent, the cab filled with blinding brilliance. I covered my face, shouting into the recorder, "They're not lights, they're..." The rest dissolved into static. Days later, troopers found my rig on Route 201. Engine dead, trailer intact, cab door hanging open, no driver. The recorder sat on the passenger seat, tape still spinning, last words buried in static. And if you sit in the cab long enough, if you're quiet, some say you can hear the tape hiss back to life, a whisper in the static, a single sentence. They're not lights, they're eyes.
Some roads are just asphalt and paint. They take you from one town to the next, and when the trip's over, you forget them. But other roads aren't roads at all. They're traps, they're doorways, they're places the living were never meant to cross. The Smokies are older than anything we've built through them. And maybe they're alive, maybe they remember, and maybe, just maybe, they choose who gets to leave. He made it out with his rig, but he didn't leave alone. Because somewhere out there, in the fog, she's still waiting. waiting for the next trucker to follow the wrong exit, the next driver desperate enough to believe a red light in the mist, the next soul willing to listen when the mountains whisper. And if you ever find yourself on I-40, climbing east into that fog, remember this story, because the next face in your mirror might not be your own. Stay with us. There are more roads ahead, more nights darker than this one, and more stories that no one should drive alone to hear. Subscribe, because the next story may just be the last one you'll ever want to know.